Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me wherever you are in the world. It's my very first webinar. Welcome to my home here in Melbourne. It's early Friday morning, and wherever you are in the world, I hope you've had a good day, or I hope you're about to start your day. So the very first webinar, so we're using Crowdcast. If you've never used it before, there are two ways to ask questions or to chat or to interact with each other as you go. There's a little chat function. It says there, say something nice. So that's what I'm looking at. It says say something nice. I don't know whether it's trying to tell me something, or there's an ask a question button at the bottom. So if there's anything that you want to comment on, anything that you want to ask, please feel free to fill in either of those, and we'll keep an eye on it as we go. I'm joined by Jules here in the office, so we'll monitor if there are any issues. If you have got a problem, let us know. If we can do anything about it, we definitely will. Okay, I've got a short presentation that I want to run through with you this morning to give you some ideas of what those skills are of a culture maker. So if you just bear with me, I will flick over to my screen here, seamlessly doing it. Okay, so the first thing to do is to really introduce myself. I'm aware there are a bunch of people on the call who might not know me or know much about me, so I thought let's start with that. So I was a permanent employee of other people's cultures for 30 years as a selection of name badges of mine and really, really bad pictures of me, and a lot more hair in those days, pre-kids. Other people's cultures for 30 years. And, school really wasn't my thing. I didn't really flourish in school. I was a pretty smart student, but I didn't really apply myself. But I found that, kind of when I was part of a team, be it a sports team or something else, I really enjoyed that. So getting into work for me at the age of 17 was where my life really started. Where people say, oh, if you could recreate your school days, I never want to recreate my school days. Thank you very much. And so I loved being a part of a team, and I loved contributing. I loved learning more, and I developed this real ambition. But I think even from the start, certainly for me, what I wanted to do was to look at the things that weren't particularly working and kind of ask myself, what's my contribution here? How can I help? What are the things that I can do to change some of the stuff? I had different perspectives, new ideas. I guess my life changed in 1997, which is a long time ago now. I became a project manager. I had no idea what one was. The world was looking for project managers for the millennium bug. Those of you who remember the millennium bug, the world was going to end. And all of a sudden I got put in charge of a team. I was hired for my people skills and my team building skills. Everything changed for me then, because we had so much to do in such a short space of time that convention went out of the window. So I credit being kind of thrown in at the deep end as a kind of a real start to my career in culture building. And so we challenged pretty much everything that we did, and we looked for better, smarter ways to do things. And then every job that I took after that, I never stopped doing that, and that's a theme. I'm going to come back to that as we go through the skills of a culture maker. And so I went to head up big project departments in the UK, where I'm from, originally from Liverpool in the UK, that's home. And then in London, and then we moved to New Zealand in 2007. And for 6 years, I was a senior exec in government and headed up big project departments. But I never lost that sense of wanting to challenge the status quo and build a team that kind of wasn't really happy when either things didn't go our way or things got in the way of stuff. Emigrated to Australia in 2013, so here we are in Melbourne. And I had no desire to work for myself, but I went to a conference that I was very underwhelmed at, and felt that people were not only not talking about the things that were important in either project delivery or workplace culture, which were the two things that I took a keen interest in, but we're actively making it hard. There was lots of fixed mindset thinking. There was lots of negativity. There were lots of people telling you that things weren't possible. And so I wanted to make, I thought, well, there's an opportunity here for someone to stand up, maybe talk with a little bit of humor, a little bit of passion, but ultimately give people the information. One of the key issues that I had when I went to conferences or when I employed consultants myself was they kept all the IP to themselves. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity for someone to kind of define what great looks like and then to give people the information. So I wrote a book in 2016 because nobody would meet me. I'd just been in Australia for like, I don't know, 18 months, and people were like, who's this guy? Yeah, we don't want a bar of what you're selling. We only buy quick fix methods. So I wrote a book in 2016 called The Conscious Project Leader, one in 2017 called The Project Rots from the Head, which is about senior managers. And then I've done 2 books this year. And both books, Project Book and Culture Fix, are guides, the handbooks on how you can do this stuff yourself. Now, obviously, if you want to bring me in to help, that's awesome. Fly all around the place, working with organizations all around the world to help them do this stuff. But my goal with the books was to give people the information themselves, because, you know, for me as a manager, you know, often the senior exec would say, oh, we want to build great culture, but there was no book. There's lots of great books on culture, don't get me wrong, but there was no one book where I could say, here's a blueprint of how to do it myself. Here's a set of exercises on how to build a vision, on how to set core values. Here's how you agree a set of core behaviors. This is what collaboration means. And so my goal was to not only obviously build a successful speaking and program practice, but also to give people information. If you want to connect with me, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, or if you want to follow me on Twitter or all the social media, all of that's down the right hand side there, and newsletter links. And but I specifically want to talk about the community, because that's one of the things that we've done. Now, the first thing that we did was to launch a podcast for those who listen to podcasts. Because when I started listening to podcasts myself, I really felt that there was a gap in the market, because there weren't business leaders sharing what they did well or what they've learned when they're creating great places to work. And so again, you know, I just decided that we would start a podcast, and I would interview business leaders from all around the world, you know, big software companies, kind of engineering companies. So I've got lots of interviews that I've already done. I think we've got about 7 or 8 interviews in the bag. We've published 4. And so Culture Makers podcast is where I get business leaders to share what they do well, in the hope that it will inspire you. It will give you some ideas. And so we just published one with Mary Butler, who's the former talent management director at ACOM. And she had some great insights to share on scaling culture, some great insights to share if you're a startup on how to do culture well. And that's my real aim here, is to get them to give you information that you can then use within your own businesses. But the community is something that I've been really passionate about. As I said, as someone who challenged the status quo during my 30 years of permanent employment, I was always looking for like-minded people who are doing different things that I could say, well, how are you handling induction or an onboarding? How are you handling performance management? How are you handling diversity and inclusion? And you would kind of randomly meet those people every now and again, and then you would swap business cards and you would stay in touch, and that was awesome. LinkedIn latterly was the place where I went for people sharing information, but there's so much noise on social media. There are so many things that can distract you as well. You know, I'm no different to anybody else. That I wanted to create a central place that was free, where people could sign in, that no one's going to use their personal information for anything sinister, but ultimately where people could share ideas of what works for them, what doesn't. They could post questions of other people in the community. You know, we're really encouraging people from all around the world to join. So we've got over 200 members now from around the world. We only launched it a number of weeks back. And so the Culture Fix community, there's the website address there. It's free to join, and on the kind of main page is just where you can share different pieces of information. We've already populated it with lots of things in there. There's lots of value to being part of a community. I think it's important that I talk about that value. You know, we curate lots of content that we find that again provide valuable insights. Also, we want to make sure that if you're building a case for change, you've got access to statistics, to research, that there are things that you can download and print out. But I always say that the best experience is within other people who've already been there and done that. And so that's the real network of peers. As well, I think the value of a community is helping you to do some root cause analysis. Is, oh, we've got this problem. You know, often one of the things that people will say to me is, oh, we're not very good at performance management. We need to get rid of some people, you know, and the root cause is actually the fact that managers don't know how to set expectations. And so it's that kind of thing that a community is good for, is to help you to understand the root cause. I travel, like I said, I travel all around the world. I do lots of events. I've already got lots planned for next year. So wherever I am in the world, I like to kind of do short videos, post them on the community to talk about what I've learned. So you get that immediacy. And also there's a Mighty Networks app. So you can just download the app so you can always get that Culture Makers information wherever you are. The last part, the last three slides, the last three bullet points, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about, but we did want to create, I guess, a more value add for people who had just a little bit of money. Again, I don't want it to be a massive sales pitch. It always feels really icky when people do that on webinars. But we've invested a lot of time, a lot of money in recording content to help you get better, not only at being you, but at understanding the content of culture and also delivering it. So we've got some development programs that we've put online, which I'm going to talk about shortly. And also I'm going to be putting some keynote speeches up there that I do for corporates and for conferences. Again, hopefully they'll inspire and motivate. And also we'll be doing some events as well. And so you get priority access to those. But yeah, there are really three elements for those of you interested in becoming culture makers. There are the three elements to that. I wanted to set a price point that, you know, we've got our costs to cover from Mighty Networks and from video and obviously time for people. But I wanted to set it at a price where it's affordable for everybody. Used to, again, putting myself on the other side of the fence when people said, oh, we've got this online program and it was great. And then it was $1,000. I'm like, well, we've got $1,000. So it's $75 for the three programs, which I'll very briefly talk to. The US dollars, by the way, is set by Mighty Networks. We can't change it, unfortunately, but it is $75. So there are three programs. The first one is about you being a better you. So for those of you who sign up for the Culture Makers programs, you get all of these things that they'll all have workbooks. The EQ room is up there right now. It's 12 modules with a workbook to help you be a better version of yourself, the emotionally intelligent person that you were meant to be, which I'm going to talk about as a key skill of a culture maker. So they're the 12 modules there. There's a Culture Maker Masterclass. Now we've got the first three modules up. The entire program will be up. It's just in post-production right now. The entire program will be up on the 1st of February. So we've got the first three up there for you to view, for you to get stuck into. I mean, this is a lot before Christmas, right? And I've also done, so this is about you understanding what culture is so that you can talk confidently about it with your peers, with senior managers, so that they fully understand what it is. And then the last part is all about delivery. And so usually culture programs don't happen because either people aren't emotionally intelligent enough to be able to sell the value of it in a way that means something to individuals. They don't understand enough what culture is. So there are always gaps in their knowledge, or there's just no discipline to be able to get stuff done. So the project leadership program, again, this entire program will be up by the 1st of February. So I'm just finishing recording these right now. We're writing the workbook. So all three will be all good to go by the 1st of February. All right. So that's the Culture Fix community. These webinars, so we're going to do these webinars every single month. You know, I kind of like this time on a Friday. It's good for different people around the world. There'll be different themes. We're really keen to hear from you what you want to hear about. So that would be fabulous if you could let us know on the community. You can either send me a message or you can post it on the community. And they'll be in the free area. The monthly webinars will be in the free area, much like the regular Q&As, community of like-minded people, and some polls and research. It's just the three programs that are paid for. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about the skills of a culture maker. I think that for those of you who are out there, there'll be people telling you that you can't do this stuff, and you absolutely can. But you know as well as I know that there are lots of hurdles in the way. Everything that I'm going to talk about on this webinar, everything that I talk about in the programs, everything that I talk about in my speeches and my books, you need to understand that I've done it all myself. I'm not a theorist, right? I understand the theory, don't get me wrong. You know, I've done tons of research. I've got all of that behind me. But I wouldn't recommend you do anything that I haven't already done myself. I think there are a lot of people out there who sell you this ideal worldview. You know, there was one recently on Twitter, and someone says, "Oh, if you don't like a job, just leave." And I'm like, "Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's great advice. What happens if you can't? What happens if your situation is such that you just don't have any choice?" That's a position that I've been in. You know, I've wanted to leave a job, but just couldn't do it. You know, and so what I want to do is to provide strategy. What I do is provide strategies to help people navigate through those things. You know, and the other great one is, oh, when you just go and have a conversation with your boss, yeah, what happens if they're a bully? And so all of these things are all positions that I've been in. So if you've got any questions as I go through, as I say, pop them in the chat there, and I'll address them at the end. But these for me are the 5 skills of a culture maker, and anybody can be a culture maker. So number 1, this is purely about self-awareness. So the great culture makers that I see from around the world, and I've had the pleasure to work with over the years, is they're highly self-aware. They know what they're good at. They know what they're not, right? And often we call them strengths and weaknesses. Now, as human beings, we don't have weaknesses. We just have opportunities for improvement. They only become a weakness when we make the same mistake over and over again, or we recognize that there's a development opportunity and we don't take it. So it's critically important that you understand yourself. Now, you know, sure, a part of this is about you understanding your personality. So Carl Jung did a lot of work around the theory of personality. And he talked about the fact that the difference between thinking people, feeling people, introversion, extroversion. And so, you know, doing a personality survey is great in the sense that it gives you that statement of kind of what you're hardwired to be. Mostly we talk about kind of thinking and feeling, or introversion and extroversion. But essentially, you've got to have this balance of technical skills and leadership skills. So your intelligent quotient and your emotional quotient. Now, depending on what you do for a job, your kind of personality will drag you towards one or other of these. So, for example, what I often find with the teams that I work with, you know, I worked with a group of engineers in Canada, very IQ, very technical, right? Because the work demands lots and lots of detail. And the things that I was working with them on was their EQ skills, because that's not the stuff that they're naturally good at. Those feeling conversations, performance management, empathy. And it's not that it's good or bad, they've just never been shown how to do that stuff. I worked with a marketing team in New Zealand, high in EQ skills, because they were constantly thinking about what's a message, what's the value, what's going to engage with the customer, and less really about the kind of background information, the background detail, more of that technical skills. So what culture makers are really good at is firstly understanding themselves. And for me, as a kind of high extrovert, a feeling person, emotional intelligence, you know, I'm much more predisposed to be good at being emotionally intelligent. So that leadership, culture building skills, you know, we're all good at one thing. It just happened that team building was the thing that I was good at. But you asked me to read a financial report. Yeah, no thanks. You asked me to do a work breakdown structure. I found that really hard. But I recognized early in my career that this is the stuff that I have to be good at, that IQ technical skills. So culture makers, you know, are constantly asking for feedback. And they recognize that they're never the finished article. What they do is they seek to elevate others. They would admit to not being the smartest person in the room. So for you, you know, you really have to get good at, well, am I technically good or emotionally good? Which is the thing to get better at? And of course, the easiest way to do this, and what culture makers around the world do, is they sit down with people and say, okay, well, you know, what's one bit of feedback you could give me this month? So that cycle of continual feedback is where we improve. Every time I do a speech, every time I run a program, I always go back and say, what's one thing you would improve about the program? What's one thing you would improve about the delivery? because I constantly want to refine and get better at what I do. So culture makers never stand still. Never stand still. Now, I had a milestone birthday this year. I was 50, and I never want to be that guy, that dad, that person that stands up at a conference and is irrelevant. And it's maintaining that view of what's the current zeitgeist. How do people talk? How do people communicate? I'll come to that in a second. But not only that, what are the latest trends? When we talk about AI, when we talk about machine learning, what's that about? How does that work? And so it's being able to stay on top of that. And a lot of the things that we share on the community is very much related to the future of work. Because what you want to do and what culture makers do is they embrace the future of work and say, how can we make that here? But crucially, they're also thinking about, well, what's the right emotional response for this time and this era? For those of you who've been in work for over 20 years, you'll know that we've come from a very command and control type approach. And many organizations still work in this way, where there's kind of suspicion, greed, where trust has to be earned. It's not assumed. These places aren't psychologically safe. I talked about this on my blog this week. I talked about this concept of psychological safety. And what you find is that people are constantly asking for permission to do things. There's no what I would call emotional capital. And what culture makers do is they create environments that are high in emotional capital. People who love what they do, that's what I mean by love. And that then becomes infectious. People who think about other people before themselves, that's what we mean about empathy. People who will give up their time. People who take time to respond. I put a post on LinkedIn about when did it become okay for people just to routinely ignore people's emails, calls, text messages. Great cultures and great culture makers, they make sure that stuff doesn't happen, because we recognize on the end of these things are human beings. So there's that compassion. And listening is a skill that everybody is losing. And, somebody asked me recently, if you could give me one bit of advice, what is it? I was like, well, I don't really know you. I was like, but if you can be that person that's listening in the room when everyone else is checking their phone, you're sending a message that you're different in a positive way to everybody else. So that's the first skill, is that they're self-aware individuals who are looking to constantly get better at being a better version of themselves. Number two, and so often, one of the things that I'll find about organizations that successfully run culture programs, now this is either me helping them or me going to interview them or me talking to them and hearing about what they've done, is they understand what culture is. Now that might sound a bit daft, but you often find, or I often talk to CEOs and I say, okay, well, what does culture mean to you? And they'll say, they'll come out with that standard, it's the way we do things around here. I was like, okay, cool. Like what? And then often there'll be this long period of silence where people are like, values. And then they start asking you questions rather than making a statement about what their culture is. Very few can describe their culture. And so culture makers understand that there's an input to culture and there's an output as a result of those inputs, obviously. But what we find in organizations is they'll either talk about the inputs or they'll talk about the outputs. They'll say things like, what we need in our culture is more collaboration. We want to be innovative. It's behavior that's holding us back. Or they'll say, we've got a really toxic culture. We're a bit too nice. It's really tough to get stuff done here, which are inputs and outputs. So I think it's really important that you understand the difference between the two, because good culture makers do. So these are all of the inputs to great workplace culture. It's what culture makers understand. They understand that the way into any culture is through the personality of its people and how they communicate with each other. Excuse me while I take a quick drink. Then they understand that the heart of every great culture is an aspirational statement of the future, a vision. That's the thing that gets people excited. Then a set of core values that provides an emotional compass that says, this as a company is what we're all about. And when you hire people, you hire for values. That's what we mean by hiring for cultural fit. We take those values and we say, right, can you demonstrate a time, or can you talk about a time when you demonstrated the values? Then there are some behaviors that we all agree to. And then these influence the things underneath those, how we performance manage, how we recognize and reward, because we always recognize and reward behavior because we get more behavior. We'd never recognize and reward skills, because then what we're doing is we're putting an individual on a pedestal and saying, they're great at that. Let's recognize that. You want more behavior. And of course, diversity and inclusion, which is not just about making sure we've got the right mix of thinking, but also that we include everybody's ideas and we welcome those ideas. Collaboration is how we'll work together. So how will we use systems and tools? What processes and compliance do we need? How do we set up the working environment to make it easy to work together? For too long, we've just assumed that collaboration is a meeting, and we've got ourselves in this real nonsense situation where we've got these back-to-back meetings, and back-to-backs are, they destroy productivity, which I'll come to in a second. Collaboration is, as human beings, how do we work together on this piece of work in this context at this time? And it might be a 5-minute meeting, and it might be a 2-hour workshop. One thing that I did as a culture maker myself is we would always change these things up, and I never conformed. And what you find culture makers do is they don't have 30-minute or 60-minute meetings because they're the outlook, the faults. They have 17-minute meetings and 42-minute meetings, and they do things that are a lot different. They set up the working environment in different ways for different personalities. They would never go open plan because they know that kills collaboration. And then innovation, how are you making time for new thinking? Are we making failure okay to do? Now, we don't want failure, right? We don't want to fail too fast where we never get the learning or we never course correct and take a different approach. How are we using the data that we own? Are we making time for creative thinking? Are we encouraging it in order that we can come up with new ideas to make our workplace better tomorrow than it is today? So these are all of the inputs into culture, right? And culture makers recognize the impact that having all of these things has or doesn't have on the outputs. So the outputs of culture, right? So we need two things really to make great workplace culture. We need emotionally intelligent people. So people, that's the horizontal line that you see here, people who can show up to work and be the best version of themselves. And then the vertical line is all about engagement. And engagement at its most basic level is, how much do you care? How much do you care about your job? How much do you care about the people around you? What the team's got to achieve by the kind of timescales that it's got? And how much do you care about the organization? And so these are the outputs. So if you get lots of care and highly emotionally intelligent employees, it's a vibrant culture. It feels great. It feels great to be part of that. You do your best work in a vibrant culture. Organizations that sit in that top right space hit their targets time and time again. And what they have is a number of culture makers. They have people who are the driving force behind making sure that culture consistently evolves. They would never rest on their laurels. It just keeps going. It keeps getting better. It keeps improving. Each department has what I would call a culture captain, someone who takes responsibility for making sure that people, do lots of culture things. But ultimately, you get the job done. Get the job done. Anything to the left of this line, as you look at it, we call toxic. It's an output of not doing those things. So, often toxic cultures are down to behavior. So where you don't have an agreement on behavior, that's the input, right? The output is a toxic culture. Similarly, when you don't collaborate well, you get this stagnant, pleasant culture. Anything below that middle line there is just unproductive. And that's because we've got an issue with behavior and collaboration. And so you can see how it all fits together. But generally, organizations will talk about inputs or outputs. So culture makers understand culture at its base level and what you need to do in order to create vibrant. Not only what you need to do, but the importance of actually taking time out to do it. When I run my 2-day programs to help organizations define it, they're saying, oh, we can't take 2 people out. I'm like, you can't take 2 days out of the business. I'm like, well, you're not taking culture seriously then. Like if you're genuinely serious about building great culture, then you have to do something different. If you're trying to do it in a 2-hour workshop because everyone's busy, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And then in the end, what they do is they resort to culture shortcuts. So culture makers recognize all of these things. Corporate values in large letters on the wall. I went to a bank. I'll share a story with you very quickly. I went to a bank and one of its values is honesty. I'm like, if you have to remind people in the banking industry to be honest, then you've fundamentally got a problem. That's not a value. That's something that everybody should have in every walk of life. Although we've seen here in Australia that maybe it's not as honest as it should be. So restructures, team names, all of these things are superficial. And they may work if it's part of a larger culture program, but mostly they don't. Mostly they're just quick fixes. Agile is the latest kind of system that we're implementing as a bit of a quick fix rather than addressing the root cause. You know, Agile is all about mindset. It's all about flexibility. It's all about behavior. And culture makers understand this. And then what you find with great culture makers, Brian Chesky is just one, the CEO of Airbnb, is that they rely less on process and more on people, which actually is kind of that's the foundation of the Agile movement, is organizations that do more than say people are most important asset and act as if people are the most important asset. And so where you get lots of culture makers in a vibrant culture, it's just easy to get stuff done. Number 3, culture makers are great communicators. They take the time to think about messaging. They take the time to think about the people on the receiving end. They never stop looking for different ways to communicate. Not for them, just an email to everyone that's copied in. Not for them, just a poster on the wall. They think about the different ways to communicate a message such that it lands with the people, so it lands with everybody, because you've got 4 different personalities according to Jung's work. So they all require different types of communication, and it's still the biggest barrier to success. Atlassian found this in the research, the future of teamwork, which is something I shared on the community. That 59% say that communication is the biggest obstacle to success, and of course it is, because we're taught how to communicate by our parents. Now, I don't know about you, but my parents definitely weren't the role model for communication. They did lots of good stuff, obviously. You know, I haven't been to prison, so that's a good thing. But communication wasn't one of the things that they excelled at. And it's not something that we're taught at school either. So we learn from our parents, we learn from the people around us. You know, one of the things that I cover in my online programs is how to do this different communication with different personalities. For me, I sit very much in that yellow quadrant there. So if you want to communicate to me, you've got to be energetic, passionate. You know, it's nice to get a compliment. You know, a guy likes to dress well, so that's always nice. So I like a little light-hearted chit chat. And I am a big picture person. It used to really bother me when people used to say, oh, you senior managers are just big picture people. It's like, I haven't met a CFO yet who's a big picture person. And so this is all about being able to present information in different ways such that it lands with your audience. So it's got to be presented in a way that's detailed focused, that's detail oriented. You've got to be able to produce the facts, the figures to back up whatever it is that you're talking about. If you're trying to sell a culture program, well, what's the tangible improvements that you can get? One of the things that we're putting up on the community is some stats to help you build a business case. That all needs to be in there. You know, percentage of this, percentage of that, productivity improvements, engagement improvements, profitability improvements, fewer quality defects, fewer safety incidents. All of these things you can get as a benefit of kind of great workplace culture. So that's why you would invest. It's got to be presented in a people-centric way. So it's got to create personal connection. So people have got to be able to see the value in it to them. So there's got to be that real human factor. There's got to be discipline. We've got to really have that action behind it. And so what great culture makers are good at doing is talking in a direct way that's also highly emotionally intelligent. It never feels confrontational, but it feels like there's real purpose behind getting something done. And of course, they've got to be passionate about it. And so I often find that, you know, when I speak to culture makers who are looking to justify doing culture programs, often they're very high in EQ. So they're very green and yellow as you look at this down here. So they can talk about the emotional connection, but less about the detail and that action required to really make something happen. And so they give up too easily. They give up far too easily, and culture makers don't do that. You know, and your job here, if you want to become a culture maker, is to create your own little bit of awesome first. And so great organization cultures are made up of great subcultures. And so just concentrate on your own bit first. This is what I used to do with my teams. I wanted my team to have the best engagement score, not because I told them, but because we created something that was so good that people looked at it and went, how do I get on that team? How do I join your team? Because we were doing pockets of really great stuff. So that's the third thing, is that they're really great communicators, and they think about the audience that they have and how to make a message land. Which leads me to number 4, is that they're people that just know how to get the job done. There's so much indiscipline. You know, productivity is suffering massively at the minute because we just don't have the sheer will to get things done. And, you know, again, Atlassian did a survey called You Waste Time at Work, and they estimated that 60% or less of work time is actually spent productively. We get sucked into back-to-back emails. You know, one of my bosses used to have hundreds of emails in his inbox, and I used to have none. And he said, Colin, how do you get it? Well, you've got nothing in your inbox. And I said, Tim, I just don't send any emails. And it just seems such a simple thing to say. It's like, if you don't send emails, you don't get them. Now, don't get me wrong. I used to sit down with my team and say, listen, I'm not going to send lots and lots of emails. My preferred method of communication is face-to-face. Now, if yours is email, awesome. Just tell people that. But what you want to do, and what culture makers do, is they get into a work pattern that's productive. So they have blocks of time for their job. They also have procrastination time planned in. We all need to procrastinate. We all need to give our brains a break. You would take 15, 20 minutes out of a morning. You definitely take lunch away from your desk for 30 to 45 minutes. And then you take time out in the afternoon to do exactly the same. You know, and then some people say to me, oh, well, if I did that, I would be there till midnight getting the job done. I was like, well, you're just no good at prioritizing your work. Because I know culture makers who are around the world who've got so much on their plate, but they're great at disciplining themselves. They're great at prioritizing their work. We love talking about how busy we are. Culture makers don't do that. They've always got time, always got time. And the things that they're working on are the most important things at that point in time. And so one of the things that I would urge you to do is to look at your day, is to look at the way that you manage yourself and your energy. Are you going to bed early? Are you coming into work with lots of energy? Are you eating the right things? Are you getting some exercise? How are you making sure that you can deliver to your job in just the best way possible? And I think that many people forget this. We get stuck in the cycle of conforming to the current way of working, which isn't the most productive. So say no to some meetings that aren't of value to you. You be the one that clearly outlines, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to make sure that you understand why you need to attend this meeting. You know, really be that person that shows everybody else how to get stuff done. But crucially, set yourself some goals. Never have a list of 10 things in a day, because you're never going to get them done. Prioritize that list, you know, and based on how much time you've got, you know, and you should always be blocking out time for your job in the day. If you're not doing that, then you're never going to be able to get your job done. You want to get to the end of the day and say, I've done the 3 things that I said that I would. How great is that feeling to get to the end of the day? But if you say something's got to be done by Friday, you might have to work longer. It's what culture makers do. They leave when the job is done, but they don't overstretch themselves. So they're great at prioritizing their work, and they're great at managing their energy as well. And then the last thing, and obviously if as culture makers, if you're doing all of those things, then you're naturally a role model for other people anyway. People look to you and go, how can I copy that? Now, we all do this unconsciously and consciously. We do this when we go to conferences, when people share ideas and we're writing things down. We do this when we listen to podcasts, read books, do development programs. We listen, we look at how people are doing things, and then we try to copy some of that stuff. And so culture makers don't have fixed mindsets. So this is from Carol Dweck's work on mindset. And if you're looking for a good book on mindset, buy her book. It's called Mindset, just so you wouldn't get confused about which one it is. So fixed mindset, we don't see possibility. We think negatively of ourselves. Now, don't get me wrong. No one can have a growth mindset 100% of the time. You're going to have fixed mindset days, but that comes back to the first point is they understand themselves so that they know when they're having an off day, right? And they may even say it. They may even show a bit of humility and say, hey, listen, just to let you know, not having a great day today. I'm still here to get the job done, but I just need a bit of time to get some things done. They get frustrated quickly. They don't develop themselves, so they're not looking at ways that they can improve themselves. These are the guys that spend money on their own development. These are the guys that will read a business book and make notes. These are the guys. So they don't do any of this fixed mindset. They're all here. They embrace challenge. They embrace opportunity. They use positive language. For those of you who read much about neuro-linguistic programming, is they find subtle ways to be positive. Now, you can't tell people to be positive, but what you can do as a culture maker is you can be a role model for positivity. You can show other people what it looks like to have a growth mindset. You can have that discipline. You can develop yourself. You can embrace new ideas. You're not the person that says, I don't know anything about that and I never will. You're not looking for problems. You're always looking for, is there a better way to do things? Now, people think that growth mindset, inspiration, motivation, comes wherever you sit in the hierarchy. It's not. Leadership's not something you get in a job title. It's a choice that you make, a choice for you to make a positive difference to people's lives. That's what it means to be a leader. That's what it means to be a culture maker. It's to be a real positive difference. It's to co-create something that people want to be part of. In order to do that, you need to understand these 5 things. You need to understand yourself. What is culture? What isn't it? How do you get greater communication? How can you be more disciplined and more productive? And how can you be the best version of yourself such that it rubs off on other people? Because what great leaders do is they create followers first. Then they embrace their followers in order to create more leaders. So I cover each of those things in each of my programs, and certainly will do by the time they're all up on 1st of Feb. And the community will provide a way for us to give you more and more information on what it means to be a culture maker. All right. So that's the short presentation. So I have a question, which I'm just going to jump into here. Thank you, David. Does an organization have to be ready or mature enough for change? And have you ever had to walk away from an organization unable to deliver a culture change? That's a fabulous question, David. No, the organization, does the organization have to be mature enough? No, it definitely doesn't. Does it have to be ready? Yes, it does. And so the first thing that I will do, David, whenever I'm speaking to an organization about undertaking a culture change program. Now, I do 3 levels. If people just want to define something, that's 2 days. If people want to define it and for me to come back every quarter to hold them accountable, cool. Or there's me coming back every month and injecting new information, new ideas, and I run a bit of a culture club. That full program, definitely have to be ready for that. Definitely have to be ready because you have to do something different. There's a big investment of time and money. Not only that, it demands senior management change. And so the first thing I'll do whenever I'm doing any kind of culture program is meet with the senior management team. Now, sometimes if it's just like an IT team of 100 people, I'll just meet with that management team. If it's for an organization, which I do a number of, then I'll meet with the exec team. And I'll talk about their responsibilities for sponsoring culture change. I talk about the language that they use and how they have to role model everything that the staff come up with. Because that's the thing about culture, it belongs to everybody. It doesn't just belong to the senior management team. It definitely doesn't belong to HR or people and culture, although they're the custodians of it. So often a culture program will emanate from HR. They've usually got the budget for it. They're not always the best role models for it because, again, like everyone, no one's shown them how to do culture change. So for me, David, I'm quite forthright. I'm quite honest and open about what needs to change. So I tell people about behavior. I shine a light on some of those senior management things that they do because I've done them myself, again, being brutally honest. And so, those are the kind of things that are quite confronting. But, I find that I come back to, do you want the kind of results and the gains from your culture program? If you do, then you have to do some things differently and not just for the first 3 months, forever. So the maturity doesn't have to be there, David, but the will has to be strong. If the will isn't strong, and I haven't yet walked away mid-program, but I've walked away before the start of a program. So I declined to do a program because they just weren't ready. And that was a government agency. All of the managers were telling me that they were ready, but the CEO just was not ready. He was paying lip service to it. And I remember one email where I decided to walk away from it. And he said that it was fourth on his list of culture was fourth on his list of priorities. And so, and we all know, those of you on the call, we all know that actually cultures where you kind of get all of your results from. So if it's not your number one priority, it's really doomed to failure. So I walked away from that one. All right, question from Jessica. Do you endorse or share any tools related to change when going into organizations going through culture change? So Jessica, I always say that, culture is a very human thing. And so what you want to do, first of all, is to do, very human things. You want to have conversations. Now, for me personally, I want you to leverage the tools that you already have. I think too often what happens is when you bring in external people, and again, having been on the other side of it, the first thing they'll do is say, right, we're going to use this tool to gather information. Part of this program is we're going to implement this tool. I think more often than not, you've got all of the information that you need to be able to successfully evolve a culture, and I very much believe in culture evolution, not culture change. So any engagement survey that you do, if you've got feedback from staff, you've got all the information to construct a program to give you the opportunity to redefine a culture. There are lots of great tools out there. I don't really endorse any. What I do is share what's worked for me in the past. So for example, as a team here, we're a relatively small team. There's 3 of us in our team. We use Slack to communicate. We use Drive as a central storage for information. We use our Culture Fix community to share our own ideas and insights. Those things work for us. And as an organization, what we've got to do within your culture and say, what do we use for communication? What do we use for collaboration? What's our intranet tool? But crucially, everyone's got to use them. I see too many tools being rolled out as culture quick fixes, but then we don't train people on how to use them. And then when they don't know how to use them, then we never leverage the actual kind of benefits that they should be giving us. So the business case fails. And so always start small. I think that you can kind of build on those tools as you go. Trello's a great tool that we use for kind of managing our workflow. It's a virtual tool, but it's equally just as good to write a card, stick it on a wall if you've got a wall about, kind of things that we can do, or a whiteboard. So it's very much horses for courses. The culture programs, I always have a look at what people use and say, does it work? Does it not work? What can you do different? And get the staff to come up with different ideas of things that they can do. Technology isn't always the answer. Neither are conversations aren't always the answer. But I think, all great cultural things start with a conversation. And then there has to be commitment on, well, how are we going to use this tool in a way that can add value to the organization? Okay, I'm just going to, for 30 seconds to see if anyone's got any more questions. Just pop them in the question there or in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you've really enjoyed this webinar. As I say, it's we're planning to do one every month alongside the Culture Makers podcast, alongside the community. I'd really urge, if you're not a member of the community, get on and join there. The free bit, you can just share ideas, information, and really, ask other people questions. We've had some really good insights shared from people, from Europe, from the US, some really fascinating stuff. And as I say, the programs are there to help. If you've got a little bit of money and you want to put some time and effort into developing yourself, to developing your knowledge, and also your commitment to getting stuff done. I really wanted to create something that gave you everything that you need to get culture change done. Oh no, get culture change done. That sounded like Boris Johnson, and get Brexit done. I immediately take that comment back. It feels like a good place to leave it. Enjoy the rest of your evening, your morning, your day, wherever you are. And I want to say a big thank you for joining us here on the Culture Makers webinar today. Thank you.